Mezco wants you to play a game. This is your look at the new Mezco Toyz Saw Mega Scale Billy the Puppet with sound. The MDS Mega Scale Saw figure with sound stands at a menacing 15 inches tall and features 11 points of articulation. Depress the buttons secretly hidden on his back to activate sound. Billy is outfitted in his infamous tuxedo and bow tie. His blackened eyes and red irises are always watching. Before we get a closer look at the MDS Billy the Puppet, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall it actually stands. And while I'm stopping the tape measure at the very top of his head, I find it ironic, the fact that nowhere on the packaging, short of a quick mention on the back description, do they actually refer to this character as Billy the Puppet. Instead, they're quick just to settle on calling it Saw. Everywhere on the box says Saw, and not Billy the Puppet. Strange. Anyways, though, Billy stands 15 inches exactly, and you can switch that to centimeters. I can switch that over to centimeters to tell you that the MDS Billy the Puppet stands 38.2 centimeters in height. Now, MDS Billy seems to be using the exact same mold, at least the same body, as the previous released MDS Chuckies, any one of them that we've had a look at on this channel. Yes, there are things, of course, that have been changed, primarily the head, the hands, and the feet. But if you were to strip this guy down, not that I would, but underneath all of that would be the same body that Chucky has gotten in the past, right down to the fact he also does have an audio button in the exact same place. Of course, before we talk about his audio, which is one of the big things that I have an issue with when it comes to this particular figure, let's get a closer look at Billy the Puppet. Now, unlike Chucky, who used this body before, Billy, I find notably, is a lot heavier, and I think a lot of that can be really added up to this area of the body. While the rest of the body is generally quite light, and it's the same expected weight that you would normally have gotten with Chucky, really so much more additional weight has been added to the noggin here, this plastic head sculpt for Billy. In a way, it's good because it adds some extra weight to the character. In a disappointing end of it, it also causes the figure to fall over frequently because his head is simply just really super heavy, and you're asking very little of these tiny little feet that are doing their best to hold him up. If the key I find is actually just rotating the feet outward. If you have them straight forward, that doesn't seem to have proper stability enough to keep Billy from falling over. If you have the feet sort of widely spread, then it's enough that it seems to sustain and hold the weight of his giant head. Speaking of his head, let's have a look at that right now. Certainly does capture the essence of Billy from the Saw films. Now, of course, when we ever see Billy, it's generally either him riding in on his tricycle, or a lot of the times it's just his image appearing on the television, and you know something bad is about to happen. I do feel, to the credits, Mezco delivers a real solid-looking Billy the Puppet, right down to the imperfections that would have been on his movie counterpart as well. I do like these little imperfections, these little pockmarks and scratches that they've done to the surface of his skin, or in this case, his head. If you are curious as to whether his mouth does open, I can tell you right out the gate, it doesn't. And yes, I am a little disappointed that it doesn't open and close, but with a lot of these MDS figures, essentially, again, you're just getting the same body, of course, brand new tailored costume, and then it's going to be a different head sculpt. I can't see why they would have sculpted in a separate mouth. I would have personally loved the idea of having Billy with a mouth that actually could open and close, but that may be something that another company would approach, or maybe they may down the road release a Billy the Puppet that actually does have an open and closed mouth. I do like the coloring that they added to this. Again, a simple trick of the trade is, with a lot of the times, this is just, it's basically accomplished by just taking a darker plastic. My guess is probably a gray plastic. And then they just coated over top of it this sort of shinier looking white paint. And what it ends up doing, very effectively, is it leaves the areas underneath untouched by the white paint, so those details still pop and show through, while still the surface remains that white color. Very simple. A lot of companies do this, and it's always effective when they do it. Of course, you've got the big spirals there on the either side of his cheeks, the big black eyes with the inner circles of red staring right at you, and of course his bright red lips. I do think the paintwork here is quite good. I feel it lacks a little bit when you look at the back of his hair. Now, understanding Billy, of course, in the movies does have black hair, but I feel like this could have been an opportunity, and I know it would have involved additional paint, but I feel like they have just painted this black instead of just relying on the black plastic, because unfortunately, like looking at this, it just looks and it has that feel of black plastic. And I understand that if this is going to be black anyways, why would they feel the need to paint it? It just, because it feels unfinished and it looks unfinished. And if just a little bit of black paint certainly could have rid the idea of this looking unfinished, I would have enjoyed just a little bit of black paint, just like airbrushed or spray painted on there. So it just didn't look like it was an unfinished surface. Other than that, though, I really do like the way that the head sculpt turned out. And it does, to the credit of Mezco, it does look accurate to the way he does in the movie, just more super stylized. Moving from his head, however, let's have a look at his body. You'll probably see there is something missing. There's unfortunately a big missing button. I have the button over here, and while I'm not much of a seamstress, I'm sure I could easily sew on a brand new button, or sew this button on with a little bit of threading. Unfortunately, though, the threading that they use to keep these buttons in place is very super light. They probably could have run a few more passes, I feel, to tighten up these buttons. And unfortunately, I've already lost one. But it's right over there, so I'll just sew that back in place. Just in case you are curious, though, let's just put the figure down here. This does actually unsnap. And you're not doing it by having to unfasten the buttons. All it is actually just these old snaps. You probably had clothing growing up that had these similar snaps. And they just line up to these holes on the other side. When you do open up the jacket is where you actually see his white shirt and his orange bow tie. But it's weird because when you do up the jacket, you hide all of it. And just be careful, of course, when you are snapping it back into place. Don't do what I did. I think I actually may have put pressure against the button when I was snapping it back up. But even like looking at the button, these ones I've barely touched. And it looks like the threading is just barely holding on. So I may actually have to go in and just sew those up as well, because I feel like this button's next to go. And of course, this may be the last lone surviving button on Billy's jacket. I'm going to have to sew it on. Just be careful. You probably don't even need to open up the jacket. I just did for the sake of this review. But definitely do be careful with these buttons because I don't feel like they're going to stay on very long. Then, of course, the new things that are sculpted on this figure, departing it from the Chucky previously looked at figures, is brand new gloves. The Chucky didn't have the gloves. The Billy does have the gloves. But basically, like the body underneath is all the same carbon copy. Then, of course, down to not quite ruby red slippers, and it's certainly not Dorothy's shoes, but he has these glittery red shoes. And I'm actually surprised that none of it so far has come off onto my hands. I do like the fact that they did add the glittering as opposed to just simply painting the feet red or painting the shoes red. It's a nice touch on Mezco's part that they actually did paint this. And probably what they did do is they probably painted it red. Then they added the glitter, and then they probably gone in and sealed it. Even if I run my fingers across it, I have a little bit of it, but not as much as I was certainly expecting. Now, obviously, you guys are going to want to see where the sound comes from. If I just lift up Billy's jacket, it's not very easy to get to, mind you. And then he has this Velcro seam right here. All you have to do is just open this up. I'm going to do my best not to hit the button while I'm doing this. And yes, something that you're probably used to seeing is this triangular battery cover, which inside actually holds 3 LR44 batteries. No, you don't have to worry about going to a store just yet. Mezco does pack them inside. You've got the on button, or the activation button right here. And then you've got try me off and on. Now, this is my concern when it comes to the MDS release of Billy the Puppet. And I have to kind of look at this as two different logic, two ways of thinking of it. If you have it in try me mode, which I'll switch to right now, and then you go ahead and press this button, pressing it again, yeah, it's the exact same sound. Now, you would probably go to the same conclusion that I would go to. Well, the try is only going to give you one option. So let's switch it to on. Pressing that button again. And pressing it again. No matter how many times you press this button, you'll get the exact same audio. I thought maybe I would just eventually settle on something else other than just Billy laughing, but it doesn't change. It doesn't change whether you have it to try, and it doesn't certainly change it when you set it to on. I don't even know why they would have even put the functionality on there, obviously other than the fact that they're reusing the exact same body. But between try and on, there's nothing that changes between the sound. Now, here, of course, is where my logic comes into play. I could debate with myself. On the one end, Billy the puppet only really giggles. I know what you're thinking. Billy also talks. Well, it's not technically Billy that talks. It's John Kramer. John Kramer talks and uses the puppet. If we take John Connor out of the equation, John Kramer out of the equation, and you look at it just as Billy the puppet you would assume only would giggle. The other end of that argument, I would certainly say, is if you're going to be releasing an MDS release of Billy the Puppet, I would want him giggling, of course, the way he does in the movie, and I'd also want him to say something like John Kramer's speaking on his behalf. At the very least, if they had given us two different audio effects, one with him giggling, and not anything else from the movie other than John Kramer just saying, "Do you want to play a game?" That's the only thing I feel this figure could have come with. Maybe the try could have had the giggling of Billy the Puppet, and the full on setting would have given us the giggling of Billy, along with "Do You Want to Play a Game" by John Kramer. Not unless they couldn't get the licensing from Tobin Bell, and who was the actor that, of course, that played the role of Saw in the movie. Maybe they just couldn't get the likeness, or they couldn't get the licensing for that. So they ended up having to settle on just the giggling for Billy the Puppet. But I am a bit disappointed that that's all you get. Chucky and the Tiffany that we've looked at, I think Tiffany also was an audio speaking doll. They both had audio clips, and they had several audio clips. With Billy only really having just the one, I feel like it's a bit of a letdown. Needless to say, the articulation on the MDS Billy is that his head moves quite freely all the way around. Despite the fact that he is heavy, despite the fact that this causes the figure to fall over if you're not careful, I will say to the credit, the head does move quite easily. It moves up, it moves down, it moves back and forth, and you can rotate the head all the way around. You just want to be careful of course, the collar on the jacket. The arms also hinge out. Now, unfortunately, this one arm's not so much an issue. It moves in and out. You can rotate it back and forth, and he does have rotation in the hand. This other arm, on the other hand, literally on the other hand, is loose. And I have not had this out of the packaging for very long at all, and I think it came from the factory with an excessively loose shoulder, and that's disappointing. What I also forgot to mention as well is that they do have swivel. There's his giggle right there. He does have a swivel where the elbow will be. So basically he has articulation here, and of course the articulation in his hand as well. He does have nothing here in the torso, primarily just because, of course, there's all the electronics that are working underneath all this to provide the audio. The legs do somewhat split out. They go forward and back, and then he has articulation also in the feet. And that's it. All in all, it's not a bad-looking figure. I'm just pleased, finally, that we are getting ourselves an MDS Billy the Puppet. Smart use, again, by making use of the MDS Chuckies, because after all, they already have that in their inventory. Of course, they're going to want to reuse that, and what a perfect candidate to use than Billy the Puppet, who would have been about the same size as Chucky. The only thing that really lets this statue, this figure down, I sort of slipped by saying his statue because he's really limited on articulation, is the fact he doesn't have a moving mouth, and I could easily accept that he doesn't have a moving mouth. but he should have come with a lot more audio clips than what he did. A giggling Billy the Puppet is fine and good, but at the very least, do you want to play a game? I think should have been a required audio clip that should have come included with Billy when he was released. And while it's a bit of a bummer that I may have lost the button on his jacket, it's still something that I think I'm more than capable of doing on my own. I'm a grown-up. I'm an adult. I think while I can't make my clothes from scratch, I think at the very least I could probably sew a button onto his jacket. You probably don't even feel the need to open up his jacket anyways. I just did it for the sake of this review to show you that they actually put clothing underneath the jacket. You probably will just leave it the way it is, and I would say if you do decide you want to start opening up Billy's jacket, just know that those buttons are awfully loose. They probably should have ran a few extra passes of thread through those eye holes. Is that what you call them, eye holes for a button? Somebody who's much more sounder and more experienced with buttons will probably be able to inform me down below. The thing about this figure that does let this down is not so much the fact that he's not listed anywhere on the box as being Billy the Puppet, short of the last paragraph. Billy is outfitted in his infamous tuxedo and bow tie. Is the only time it's mentioned anywhere on the box that he's actually called Billy the Puppet. Everywhere else, they sort of settled with calling him Saw. I sort of feel like that's a cheap move. They probably easily could have called him Billy the Puppet, but that's not the thing that bothers me. It bothers me the fact that this figure doesn't have any additional audio. With Chuckies that we've gotten before, we've gotten multiple phrases of audio from the movie. And again, sort of where you can use the argument, well, Billy the Puppet doesn't do any talking. It's John Kramer that does the talking for the doll. Maybe if Billy the Puppet was just on his own, he probably would giggle. Maybe he would have an audio, maybe he'd have a music box or some audio clip box in his chest that would allow him to giggle. But I do think if you're going to be releasing a one and only MDS release of Billy the Puppet, I do feel like at the very least he probably should have had John Kramer saying, "Do you want to play a game?" He didn't need to have anything else than that. He didn't need to get into long narrative, but at the very least he should have giggled and he should have been able to play, "Do you want to play a game?" Let me know down below your comments what you guys think of the MDS Saw. I know some people call this one Saw, other people call him Billy the Puppet. I guess you're not technically wrong either way. John Kramer is Saw. He uses the Billy the Puppet as a means to talk on camera, or Billy the Puppet's just by himself. So, I mean, you're not technically wrong either way. I did find this at my local comic book store, so if you are in the market of picking this one up for yourself, you should be able to now find it at local comic book stores and online as well. Just as a side question, what's your favorite Saw? Let me know down below in the comment section. I kind of like the one with the insurance company guy. I don't remember which one. Is that like Saw 5? I know there's like 100 Saws. Saw's now over. We're going to be getting a Spiral movie, which is sort of in limbo. I don't know if we're ever going to get Spiral actually get released with the pandemic as it is. But let me know what your favorite Saw is down below in the comments section. Also, if you're new to the channel and liking the content you're seeing, consider the idea of hitting that subscribe button down below. Move on over to that somewhat suspicious looking box. I'm sure it's probably just your son inside. And make sure you hit that bell notification and keep your peepers peeled because there's definitely going to be a lot more videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.